So today we're going to be talking about expanding horizons and building the CGT market across Asia Pacific. I think we'll hear from a variety of different perspectives. As you'll see, we've got therapeutic developer, we've got market access, we've got regulator, and we've got developer and manufacturer as well. So I'll start by introducing myself, and then my esteemed panelists will certainly introduce themselves. And I want to thank ARM and everybody for being here. My name is Matt Hewitt. I'm the Vice President and Chief Technical Officer for the Manufacturing Business Division at Charles River Laboratories. The division for us encompasses our advanced therapeutic CDMOs, within plasmid, viral vector, and cell therapy. Then we also have our testing business under the umbrella and a microbial sterility solutions business. Charles River in general is a full-service CRO CDMO. We have operations in 23 countries. So I'm going to let everybody go down the line, and then once we do that, we'll get into the questions. Matthias?
My name is Matthias Kroll. I work for Senata Therapeutics. We're a small biotech company organized in Melbourne. So with my beautiful Germanic accent, I've got the honor of representing Australia on this panel. So Senata Therapeutics makes iPSC-derived MSCs, so they're very homogeneous and consistent. That has led us into 4 clinical programs, 2 of them advanced with 2 late-stage clinical trials in important indications reading out in the next 6 months or so, and a quite wide panel of further clinical and preclinical programs, which are quite often in large indications.
Great. Hello, everybody. My name is Antonio Leo, go by Tony. I'm from a company called Medipost. We're headquartered in South Korea. We're doing a cord blood banking business as a private fee-for-service banking business, as well as developing cord blood-derived allogenic MSC therapeutics. We have a first product approved in Korea with BLA in 2012 for treating patients with knee osteoarthritis, cartilage repair. We've so far treated close to 35,000 patients in the South Korean market. With that product, we're doing a phase 3 trial, which is about to finish end of this year in Japan with PMDA phase 3 approval, going for BLA hopefully next year. Also in the United States, we have active IND with that program going to phase 3 starting end of this year, early next year, for also pivotal study for BLA in the US. We also have a stakeholding of Omnia Bio, which is cell and gene therapy CDMO out of Ontario, Canada, in partnership with CCRM, where we're using as a facility as a manufacturing hub for our North American and European market expansion. I guess the reason I was invited here is that as a South Korean developer with a commercial experience of allogenic MSC therapy for over 13 years, going into clinical development late phase and approval in Japan as well as in the US. So I'll be happy to share our experience. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Yoshiaki Maruyama. I am the director of the Office of Cell and Tissue-Based Product, PMDA Japan. So first of all, I'd like to thank to ARM to invite me this year again. The past event, I was participating in the panel discussion for the regulatory sessions to discuss about harmonization or convergence with FDA or EMA, but this year is, very difficult year, I think, for the FDA. So that's why, this year I participate in this session. So I also happy to sharing our experience today. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you to ARM actually for the kind invitation to be on this panel today. Normally I speak in Europe, but it's good to be here in Phoenix after so many years. So I'm Francis Pang. I'm the Senior Vice President of Global Market Access and International Geographic Expansion at Orchard Therapeutics. Orchard Therapeutics is a ex vivo lentiviral gene therapy company headquartered in the UK. We have a product that's been approved in both the US and EU for a number of years for an ultra-rare disease called metachromatic leukodystrophy. And we're working certainly to expand the geographical footprint for this tremendous asset. I have a background in genomic medicine and health economics, and have a background in rare diseases as well. I was also on a nice, highly specialized technologies HTA committee for 10 years as well. So great to be on the panel. Thank you.
All right, thank you guys. I guess for the opening question, which is more of a general one, we're seeing the market, I would say, it's developing, but certainly there's been a considerable amount of work in APAC for a long time, in some cases longer than here in the US and Europe. And APAC has the highest number of products that are actually approved. But how are you seeing the market from your perspectives, whether it's as a therapeutic developer, as a developer manufacturer, regulator, or market access person? And are you seeing any trends, successes, or challenges that need to be addressed? And then obviously as we go through those, we'll go into some of the different parts. So Matthias, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, it's a fantastic market with really great potential. As we all know, I think this region is probably the one that is easiest to embrace and most readily embraces cell and gene therapies. It provides regulatory support. There's the conditional approval schemes in Japan, Korea, and in other countries. There's a lot of demand, certainly, a lot of potential, but of course there are also challenges. It's not a homogeneous region, so you can't just, for example, go to Europe and hope you can get a centralized or mutual recognition pathway for approvals. You have to think of each country individually, and you have to think of market access in each country individually as well. Asia Pacific is heterogeneous. There's Australia, there's Southeast Asia, there's North Asia, with countries that have kept to themselves a little bit, if I may say that, like China until now. Countries that are certainly leading in technology, like Japan and Korea. Countries that are ambitious, catching up. Large markets, but that don't have a lot of financial wealth to provide access to cell and gene therapies to large segments of the population. So you have to think in each market separately how best you approach it, and how you want to actually develop your product and what each of these markets means.
Yeah, likewise, as Matthias said, not only the countries and language and the regulatory jurisdictions are different, but also the market access reality is completely quite different between the markets. We look at certain markets such as Japan, who has a very streamlined reimbursement strategy, particularly for regenerative medicine products, which is very, very useful for developers like ourselves. Other markets such as Korea or Taiwan, for example, they're less streamlined. So you need to think about how you're going to get your useful therapies out there and who's going to pay for it and how. I think that market access and diversity in that market access strategy is something also should be kept in mind.
So I add the different point. So in the Japanese regulatory framework for the cell and gene therapy product, it's established in 2014. This is the dual regulation. The one is like a hospital exemption thing. So medical care and the clinical research is conducting the new act called the Safety Act. And then of course, PMDA is involved in the Pharmaceutical Medical Device Act, PMD Act, which is focused on the commercialization of the product. So these two dual regulation system is well recognized in the Asian country. I think that Taiwan or Singapore, even the Korea, is the same kind of the regulatory framework is still. So that means you can have two choice: the hospital exemption and then the pharmaceutical things. So, and then in Japan case, you mentioned in the Japan is a very strict national health insurance system. But so if once we approval in the product, almost 100% is covering for the national health insurance. And then now we review and then approve the 23 cell and gene therapy product, but 2 products is recently revoked. Then the half of them is Japanese original company. It's manufacturing for the cell therapy and or tissue engineering product. So I think the modality is a little bit different. Asian country is very good for the cell therapy product. Maybe the reason is more cheaper, or very familiar with for the mesenchymal stroma or stem cell therapy. So then half of them is gene therapy, like CAR-T or AAV-based product from the US or EU country. So yeah, there is a good possibility for the market. So if you are interested in the Japanese market, please contact me. I can explain our regulatory framework for then which way is a very good way for to developing your product in Japan. Yeah, thank you.
Great. So as a panelist based in Europe, actually I'm pretty neutral. So I kind of look at Asia Pacific from, I guess the lens of perhaps, patient access and actually how long it takes for patient access to take place. I mean, it's, from far away in the UK, what I can certainly see in Asia Pacific is that it's a long play. You're talking about, 4 years plus actually to get through, the regulatory and the reimbursement processes, right? And it's so important to be able to start, otherwise you'll never get there. You have to, think about your Asia Pacific sort of strategy pretty early on, and if possible, close to perhaps, I guess filing for, in Japan, right? So, I think some of the incentives for, or eligibility for regulatory pathways depend upon having a regulatory submission that's concurrent with the rest of the world, right? So I kind of look at it from that kind of lens, and I think, and then after that, I think about perhaps prioritization in terms of sort of tiering, and for that you think about early access, you think about national health insurance sort of coverage, you think about the orphan drug, or any similar types of incentives, right, that may help perhaps the pricing and the access. So it goes without saying, it is certainly an opportunity, but it does, require, quite a bit of, quite a bit of planning and sort of coordination, and also certainly within the company, kind of harnessing the resources to work on this stuff, because I think, for many companies that are approaching Asia Pacific, certainly the US and the European companies, this is all quite new, and you have to do quite a bit of due diligence, before, deciding the kind of the sequence, and so that's from a kind of a neutral perspective. Yeah.
You mentioned incentives, Francis. Yeah. Indeed, I think there are lots of incentives. Countries like Korea and Japan really almost try to attract foreign companies to come and develop and register their product in their countries. The trade organizations do a great job attracting people, informing them, educating them. There are funds like the KDDF that can help with the cost of development. But in spite of all of these incentives, there's a little bit of competition between the countries as well, right? And there's also an expectation that you come there, perform your local development, and also, if possible, some measure of local manufacturing. So there's clearly, strategies made in China, made in India, and there are incentives that each of these governments will give out in order to make you actually transfer some or all of your manufacturing for the domestic market into their countries. Now, obviously, for a CGT manufacturer, it's not possible to establish manufacturing in each of these countries. So I would wish, while I appreciate from our biotech perspectives all of the incentives that are available and the openness and the readiness for dialogue, at the same time, the expectations also need to remain reasonable. And I wish for a little bit more coordination between the Asian countries in order to foster a regional access of novel biotherapies into their markets.
I could just add one more thing on that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's an excellent point, but it really depends on also on which stage of your company, or stage of development your company is at. If you're early stage, such government-assisted funds, whatnot can help you. But as you go into more late stage and thinking about commercially accessing each market, you got to look at the market size and also, for example, Korea, you're not really going to go into the national reimbursement because there'll be a very, very strong discount policy there versus Japan, for example. So those things have to be taken into account. And furthermore, what Dr. Mariam was mentioning about these dual track of the Act for Safety Regenerative Medicine, essentially allowing hospitals to use the procedures directly to the patients, less regulated as opposed to the BLA, but that's completely private market. So you got to have, you have to convince the patients to pay out of pocket 100%. And also to the cost of manufacturing, they have a really excellent system of downgrading, so to speak, the GMP facility compliance to a more simpler, what's called cell processing centers compared to the GMP manufacturing facilities. So there are elements there, but you got to really strategize that depending on the stage of how mature your pipelines are, and then how you're going to access those commercial markets in which model, and who's going to pay at the end of the day.
Yeah, maybe, Tony, I might ask you one other question around that, since we brought up CMC and we had a question for that. You guys have already pretty well covered it. But as I'm sitting here listening to you talk, and then your introduction, you've been doing existing manufacturing in Korea at commercial. Sounds like you're well on your way in Japan, and then now you're doing manufacturing in Canada for a US trial. Yes. So how are you and MediPost working through the translation of that data and the translation of some of the APAC regional differences, say between South Korea and Japan versus the manufacturing requirements in Canada to then bring it here to the US? What's that translation like?
Yeah, no, excellent question. So just strictly regarding the CMC, because the clinical is a different question.
Let's keep it simple.
Right, so CMC. Yeah. So what there has been, it's been a really interesting but very a productive experience dealing with MFDS, that's a Korean regulatory agency, and then the PMDA, and then now also with FDA, is that we have been basically approaching with two thoughts in mind. One is there are some regulatory differences or requirements that are different between each of those regulators. For example, we are sourcing our MSCs from allogenic donated cord blood units, and hence because it's blood, there are some difference in the blood regulations between Korea versus Japan. So we have to apply some additional testing for blood qualifications or testing requirements so that we can source the material to Japan that were not required by the Korean regulatory agency because the regulations are different. Similar elements are also true for some of the CMC in relation to the cell manufacturing. So we obviously abide by those, put additional layers on top of it. At the same time, we're also trying to do is a process optimize and apply some of the process improvements as we move to the next regulatory jurisdiction and take that as an opportunity to do so and then at the back of our obviously 13 years of CMC commercial, and then we do add on the comparability strategy and really using that opportunity as something that we can change, something that we could have changed, but then you don't really want to touch your commercial CMC unless you really have to. So that's our approach. So we have to add on something that's required by the next regulatory agency, but at the same time, use that opportunity to make improvements that you wanted to improve, and then that generate the comparability data, and that as an opportunity. That makes sense?
No, that's perfect, and thank you. Francis, I'm kind of interested from your perspective as you're listening to Tony, when you hear that kind of evolution of product and moving across geographies, from a market access perspective, does that You feel good about that? Are you getting hives just hearing it? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're talking about sort of manufacturing, CMC, is always, always a bit of a challenge, right? Even before the market access stuff. But I think, for our ex vivo asset that we have, right, we have the apheresis, and in a treatment center, the cells, the fresh cells, are actually sent to a manufacturing site in Milan. You have the gene correction there, cryopreserved, sent back to the treatment center. Now, it's more fundamental, in terms of, thinking about the kind of the flight routings and the flight times to enable that to happen. You've got transporting fresh cells, right? But also ensuring you've got a sort of a chain of custody that is pretty robust and solid, right? So there's that aspect, that we've had to work on, right? And I think the CMC aspects always very relevant for every single regulatory submission, absolutely critical, probably rate limiting as well, right? So I spoke about the long timelines, the CMC part, even before you come to assembling your regulatory dossier for submission, there's such a large component there. I think in terms of the market access stuff, right, the way I think about it is perhaps, there's a lot of international price referencing going on in Asia Pacific markets. You go for the market that is probably where you would try to get perhaps the highest price, right, which could be referenced. I think more and more you've got cost effectiveness analysis being deployed, like what you have in Europe and some parts of the US as well. And the cost effectiveness analysis is being deployed in a bit of a slightly different way, not really for price setting, but really for perhaps sort of price maintenance purposes, right? Or you can actually determine the kind of sort of discount that you would actually have for a particular product, when it's been re-reviewed for pricing periodically. That's what I certainly think about. I think, in terms of pricing now, it's not just confined to Asia Pacific, right? You've got most favored nation, right, in the US, and it's referencing countries which have 60% of the GDP of US, right? And then I think, some of the Asia Pacific countries fall into play, right? So it is certainly, Asia Pacific is certainly not divorced from, the rest of the world, US and EU, when you're thinking about launch sequencing and planning.
Yeah, and I mean, when we start talking about, the stories here with multiple countries, some within Asia, some out of Asia, I think for PMDA, you could kind of making a point around some of the regulatory, maybe harmonization, but more likely convergence, so that the regulators can still maintain the independence to approve and evaluate specific products within their geography. How are you looking at potentially mutual recognition? Do you think that's something that is possible locally, or are you already doing some data sharing with some other regulators?
So most of you are very happy if we accept for the mutual recognition. But I think this scheme is very need high level decisions, not for the regular side, right? So that's why we are, at the moment, regular is, we are having sharing the information. This area is very special field, because even EMA or FDA also sharing the information for this area since decade. So and then there is still some gap among the regulators, but we try to avoid these gaps. If, like you pointed out, or the the difference, you see the difference for the among the regulator, and then farm also they organize APAC RM is a industry association of the APAC area. And then they also surveyed and then analyzed for the gaps for among the regulator or the ASEAN regulators. So sometimes the quality is over spec for the Japanese regulators. Maybe some country still required for the non-clinical data for the animal or something like that. But this point out is very important because then we think about in the why came from this gap. How should try to avoid these gaps? That's a very important thing. So, yeah.
If I can add, just from our experience, looking at PMDA, FDA, on the other reference agencies such as Health Canada, TGA Australia, Korea, Taiwan, now recently HSA Singapore and also MPRA Malaysia, for example. So they understand the regulatory frame of the CMC. So in our experience, you go with ICH and in CTD format, you fill in the modules. There could be some differences in the expectation level of certain elements, as Dr. Mariam said, but overall backbone of it, if you work with those reference or recognized agencies who actually have a regulatory framework to be able to assess your CMC, then the bulk of it actually stays the same in our experience. So don't get too bogged down about it's going to be all different. But however, there will be some local regulatory differences, as I mentioned as an example of the blood regulation, for example, or certain specific elements. There will always be those, but if you can bring your backbone and start speaking to the regulators early, and then discuss and learn about what would be the difference and what are the gaps. You actually might have to fill the gap, or you might actually already have more data than they might be expecting. So it's keep your backbone. They're not that much different in our experience, but just be prepared to adjust and adapt to the local regulatory requirements. And by doing that, you can just communicate with the regulators early. You can really address that. But plan early.
Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly having components of dossiers that are recognised certainly would be useful. I mean, I think the resource that's required in developing these dossiers is certainly important. I think the challenge comes whereby I think the regulators are kind of evolving at different speeds now, right? So certainly. In Europe, you've got joint HTA and joint regulatory assessments now, right, which is taking place. Also, I guess in the US, the recognition of biomarkers as a basis for approval. The complexity comes when you have the health economic modeling, right, because that clinical data that's in your regulatory file actually has to propagate into the health economic analysis, and that's where you could perhaps get a bit unstuck, when it comes to, the reimbursement side. I think scientific advice would be certainly quite useful. I know some of the agencies do provide scientific PMDA consultation in Japan. Obviously, it's quite useful. What do you do in terms of trying to consolidate the feedback from different agencies as well? Right? That's another.
I think Australia is trying to carve out a special niche for itself within Asia Pacific. The TGA allows you actually to start clinical trials very often under clinical trial notification schemes, which means you don't have an IND or IMPD-like approval process. Under certain conditions, your first in human trial, be that a phase 1 or phase 1/2, can be done with just a notification after ethics committee approval. It is also not systematically required to manufacture your clinical trial material for that first in human trial under full GMP, which means that in Australia you can actually go into humans quite quickly and without too much regulatory burden and costs. So this is actually taking off. In addition, all R&D expenses that you that you incur in Australia, also under certain conditions, can be reimbursed up to almost 50%, so 43.5% or 48.5% in cash the year after you incur them. So that is obviously a strong pull for biotechs and pharma developers to come to Australia and conduct their early clinical development there. Unfortunately, Australia has learned that these programs don't always stick. So after early and potentially mid-stage clinical development, manufacturers often then shift to United States and Europe and other jurisdictions for getting approval in these higher value markets first, and then later on come back to Australia. But it is certainly a strong pull. It's also relatively unique. In Asia Pacific, we of course also know mechanisms that other regulatory agencies will employ, such as priority review. But this positioning certainly seems attractive to quite a few overseas biotechs.
But I'd just like to add one thing about we're just talking about the CMC harmonization, and as I mentioned, the backbone and the approach, should really be working in general among these regulatory agencies. But if you move to the clinical elements, that's a completely different story, because what the regulatory agencies obviously look for is that, often we are developing first-in-class, unmet need addressing therapies. Therefore, by definition, there's no standard of care or that really can match your treatment regimen or the ways you treat or you do surgical implant, whatnot. So those elements will be different clinically because you've got different patients, different hospitals, different doctors, and different regimens. So you've got to approach that, can that clinical data ever be harmonized? Maybe that'd be a little bit more tougher than the CMC. So you got to recognize that, and that leads into the health economics and then reimbursement, because local markets will actually have a more specific view on local medical reality that is somewhat different to the CMC.
No, appreciate it. I guess we'll go to the audience and see if there's any questions before we move on. Anybody? All right. So please, I'll stop a couple more times if there's questions, and feel free to speak up. So I think, from everybody's perspective, it seems like we're pretty convinced that there's a bright future, so to speak. And, I think as we've shared in the beginning, APAC at many times has been at the forefront of innovation in this space. So there's a variety of things that we can talk about in individual countries or across APAC, but what are the things that are coming or the things that you think need to come to keep, but also potentially speed up innovation and adoption and access of these therapies? I don't know who wants to start. Please jump in.
Yeah, I think certainly, I guess the access to the affordability. I think to be fair, we've seen quite a few CAR-Ts, but in terms of gene therapies, actually, certainly for rare pediatric diseases, they're few and far between, right? So I think Zolgensma is a case in point. It's been reimbursed in a number of markets in Asia Pacific, but certainly at a price point that is way below actually where you're seeing elsewhere, right? So I think part of the challenge really is in terms of, I guess, some of the pay for performance schemes and the acceptance of those, right? Is that I think it's still kind of evolving as a kind of a requirement or in terms of acceptance, I guess by certain markets. So I think there's certainly a lot more work to be done there. I think there's certainly interest, but I guess the affordability issue is quite important.
Yes, so what was really be talked about already, but is this dual track in Asia. This has been almost 10 years in Japan, ASRM, Act for Safe Regenerative Medicine, and this is a private pay. The hospitals do treatments at the CPC, Cell Processing Center, as a CMC. That pattern is expanding into Korea, recently to Taiwan as well. So this is a private pay market, but you actually get earlier access to the patients. You can bring your products or CMC to the field or sooner. And that would be a great, how we view it is that there'll be great channel to collect so-called real-world evidence and real-world data clinical data, because then that can be really leveraged, because then European markets and US markets all talk about real world evidence. It'll be an excellent opportunity because generally, culturally, the Asian population and patients, they are more used to privately paying for things than the US and Europe, just history of it. So they are allowing, governments are allowing those access for the patients who will pay 100% and then go and get those treatments accessible. And from industry like us, we're looking at that as a good opportunity to collect the real world data.
So the Japan case is, as I mentioned, the Tony said, the medical practitioner has some good power, so that's why the Japan is allowed for the medical care for cell therapy and gene therapy too. Actually, recently, the last year, no, this year, in gene therapy also the scope for the safety of regenerative medicine. So then, the medical practitioner can use for this therapy or as medical care, but now I think the most of society, such as ISCCR thing, ISSCR, right? Mm-hmm. Japan is too aggressive to use it for the hospital exemption things. Mm-hmm. So sometime bad clinic use bad using. So show us the evidence for the efficaciness. Safety is okay, but how about the efficaciness? So that's the next step we're thinking. So we should each medical doctor should publish some efficacy data, or open to the public for the efficacy data. Then, if not good at enough for the efficaciness, then should be out. That's the next step. So we're thinking. So.
What I wish for as a biotech, looking a bit north to our neighbors in Asia, is the possibility of conducting, on the basis of good early stage safety and initial efficacy data, a pivotal trial across the Pan-Asia region that will give me approval in multiple jurisdictions.
Yeah, small ask.
Yes.
So looking at that and maybe taking up on the regulatory front, I think that and Tony, you covered this to some extent already, but is there anybody else that wants to offer advice for what to expect when you're doing trials, development, market access, and commercialization in APAC? And, Matthias, you've done working in Europe in the past, and Francis, you as well, but also then being now in APAC and looking to expand. Is there any pointers, and from the regulator perspective, are there any pointers that you would give people, one or two things to say, this is what you should think about as you come here?
Local knowledge and potentially local or regional partnering can be a very good idea, especially if you're a small company. Yeah, and maybe to pick up on that, can you give an example of something that might be a little bit different for the local knowledge versus not knowing it? Yeah, it is just about being able to understand the different ins and outs of regulation and market access, how to promote a product, how do you need to be organized in order to do that effectively. From a small to mid-sized developer's perspective who is overseas, that's a mountain to climb. But there are actually organizations, for example, in Japan and Korea, I can think of some that would partner with you and actually help you set up your base, help you to do your development and approval processes efficiently, help you with your market access, and maybe bring in even yet another organization that will help with the promotion. So I think from our perspective, yes, that local and regional partnering could be interesting, and I would even include China in that. China, interesting topic.
We'll get to it, don't worry.
Well, yeah, I mean, from our experience, you might find it surprised, but if you're an Asian country, that doesn't mean that it's easy to go across the next, neighbor. So from our perspective as a Korean company, it's just about as difficult to go to Japan, different language, different culture and everything, as if you were coming from US to Japan. So 100%, you got to have the local network, especially your clinical KOLs in locally, so that they can actually be a champion. They need to believe your therapy before they can sell it to anybody, including regulatory agencies. So local knowledge, local network is really, really something you need to start off with. And then also, in our experience, having a right consulting group to actually be navigating with you, hand-holding with you in that jurisdiction, because they know the landscape, not only necessarily on the clinical side, but on the CMC side and the regulatory side. So the clinical KOL, you have to do your own homework, but on the CMC regulatory side, find a good consulting group or people that you can work with. I think that would be my advice.
I want to add one thing. The meeting for the key opinion leader also very important thing, because if you bring your product to like Japan, you should confirm that there is a space to use your product. Otherwise, nobody supported your product, then it's very difficult to. So the finding the key opinion leader also very important. So I should recommend for the beginning of the development, you just starting to the finding the key opinion leader for each country, I think. Yeah.
I would certainly, second that actually in terms of the key opinion leader, I guess, identification and management, right? So, I think even before, evaluating the markets, I mean, we've spent a lot of time in the air just traveling to locations to build those relationships, right? Because those key opinion leaders will be the sponsors, for any kind of clinical study that might be required, but even for, some of the, scientific consultations and also for the regulatory dossier, and it's a useful sponsor. I mean, I think when it comes to, thinking about which markets to select in APAC, obviously due diligence, and I think there are certainly capable vendors as what's been mentioned. I mean, I think the market entry model, do you partner with another corporate? Do you partner with a local distributor that does Asia Pac, or do you partner with a distributor that has specialism in a particular country? I've yet to find a distributor that actually has full coverage, of South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Australia, the entire lot. I think you have to kind of piece together, I guess, your partners, right? Yeah. I think in terms of the addressable population, I think that's really quite important. So if you have perhaps a very ultra rare disease, very, very low incidence, then you may have to go pan-country, in terms of partnership, just for that opportunity to be attractive to the distributor, right? So, and to make the economics work. I think newborn screening has not been sort of mentioned yet. I mean, I think that's certainly so important for patient identification, and I think certain countries such as Taiwan are pretty advanced. And I remember the SMA days for nusinersen, right? And I was a bit astonished, when I was at Biogen, wondering, why are we going to Taiwan actually to be doing health economic studies and thinking about newborn screening and this and that. But now we know it's such an important aspect to start early on. And do you actually have newborn screening in place already, for your condition? I think that's another one. I think we mentioned the timelines. I think that goes without saying. Qualified treatment centres, right? So in Australia, of course, you have qualified treatment centres, centres that are experienced in transplantation, for example, spread all across the country. Whereas in other countries, such as sort of Taiwan, there may be, around the capital or certainly in South Korea, around the capital as well, right? That's very, very concentrated. And sometimes you do find competition actually between hospitals or providers to become the qualified treatment center, and so managing that kind of relationship is pretty important. And then I guess in terms of the kind of the regulatory and pricing, right? And I think certainly with more and more of the countries in Asia Pacific moving towards HTA involving health economic analysis, finding a vendor that has local expertise that could provide local data for your economic model, which may have been developed abroad, right, in Europe, or US, and adapted to the Asia Pacific country concern. So, just a few things that we've thought about, when it comes to due diligence. Yeah.
No, appreciate that. I'll pause again if there's any questions in the audience. I think we have one right up here up front. We have a mic this year, no cube. I think she was up front.
Hi, my name is Eva Dru. I work at Invitec. So for the question, we heard in a lot of the other sessions difficulties in funding in the US markets for cell and gene therapy. Can you share a bit more what is the situation for funding in APAC?
Sorry, the question was how you...
Are there the similar difficulties in funding? Like in quite a few of the sessions that I've been to today and yesterday, mentioned the fact that there was a period for cell and gene therapy where funding was easy and accessible, and now it's becoming much more of a difficulty. So since you are in that space, do you find similar difficulties in APAC, or do you have other ways to continue your activities?
It's a little difficult to hear because of the echo of your question. Did you make it?
I didn't make it.
Okay. Sorry. It was just difficult to hear from this point. Yeah.
You could just yell at us.
Yeah. The question is, there is a lot of funding difficulties.
Funding.
Funding, yeah.
Shared by other presenters in other sessions. So do you have similar difficulties in APAC, or is it different?
Okay.
Yeah.
We did work it
Right.
out.
Yeah.
The question is we've heard in other sessions that there are some funding difficulties, certainly in the space. And the question was, are we seeing similar difficulties within APAC? So I'm not sure if PMDA has anything for that, but I'll let the other one certainly.
No, but
yeah.
for the Japan case, of course, PMDA is no funding.
Oh, it's an easy one. Thank you. Yeah.
But for the we have Japan also has some funding agencies called AMEDO. Or today the JETRO is coming. JETRO is also have some new funding or accelerate for the bringing in your product in Japan. So there is some the funding. So, but I think most of people are very difficult to access these information, right? But we are now trying to more disseminate all these information by English. So hopefully, I think you can access all these information. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so if I can just add my 2 cents, the funding difficulty, I think it also goes into which stage of your company is. And as we all know, I mean, North America and Europe experienced this downturn, and that's not dissimilar in Asia. And a lot of startups and the venture funding, the landscape is much changed in the last few years compared to about 10 years ago, say. But there is a different pockets of investment that will be more aggressively investing if you have already demonstrated your proof of concept beyond clinical late stage, but you have to draw the picture that your proof of concept proven late stage, hopefully commercial, even better in your own jurisdiction, that has to be targeting a much bigger market. So it's almost like a stepping stone sort of strategy. So you try it, you fail cheaply, quickly in your own jurisdiction, but if you succeed there, then you got to link that up to the much bigger market, and then there's another pockets, which substantially requires much bigger scale of money, but there is that interest because of in the backdrop, you got the CAR-Ts approved in the US and global market. So now investors are actually recognizing that cell and gene therapy is real. So therefore, they're not, instead of just doing a VC investment like in 10 years ago, they're actually looking for something that works and the team that's prepared to bring that to a bigger market for bigger payout.
We are an ASX listed company on the stock market, so obviously our funding mechanisms are stock market dependent. But of course, we also feel that when it comes to seeking corporate deals, the bar is quite high in our programs, which are actually quite advanced. We've already concluded a few clinical trials successfully, and yeah, we just feel like in line with the global environment that the bar for funding CGT is quite high. But having said that, I think there are also opportunities in Asia Pacific by seeking certain local partners who will then bring capital and capabilities which can be combined with our IP, data, and so on in order to launch further development. So I think being in Asia Pac also brings with it opportunities, and certainly from an Australian perspective, we also include funding options in other countries across Asia Pacific. We go on roadshows there, for example, in Singapore, Hong Kong, and other countries.
So I should actually add it there, just thanks for bringing it up. Medipost is actually a publicly traded company in Korea, and as we were expanding into phase 3 in Japan and phase 3 in the US, it requires obviously a substantial amount of capital. So 3 years ago, we closed $180 million funding, both from Korean investors, and right now we're also currently closing another round that's close to about $190 million US, also from Korean investors on the back of the US phase 3 trial investment. So that would be an example, but then you have to at the right stage to talk to the right category of investors. So that's something you need to be mindful about.
Great question. Anybody else? We got one up front here over on the right. Well, there's two now. Oh no.
Hi, my name is Andrew Fleury. I work with CGT Partners. We're a Tokyo-based strategy, regulatory, and clinical advisory firm. First, just very quickly about your funding questions. So AMED, the VC, it's called a certified VC system, and it's actually great. It's like a 2-for-1. So if the certified VC puts in X, AMED will potentially add up to 2X on top of that. And I know there is a certified VC in this room who has experience with that. They're present here. So that's something to look into if you're looking at moving into Japan. But anyways, I do have a question, mostly I think for Francis. You mentioned the pay-for-performance schemes need to be considered and perhaps adopted more in the region to, I imagine the lens here was provide more commercial incentive for companies to consider development in the region, excuse me, sooner than later. I'm curious what your thoughts are, because a lot of these regions, and in particular Japan as a large country with a national healthcare system and a globally respected regulator, have a system that provides greater access to these therapies, even though the price points are much lower than what we're seeing in the US. And I think in some cases we've seen these high-priced products in the US. I think case in point would be Bluebird's products. Skysona is entangled, not having the impact that was expected of them and that the analysts were looking for, that the company was looking for, because the price was too high and agreements couldn't be made with the payers under the US system. Whereby in Japan, where it's a national healthcare system, for example, you make one agreement and you're done, you're ready to go, and everyone in the country has healthcare. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on the potential of that system to provide the sort of commercial incentives that companies developing gene therapies for diseases that are very targeted, and I understand they can also be very ethnically diverse, but also cell therapies that maybe don't see such a great difference in the price between jurisdictions, but nevertheless, we do often see they're priced more cheaply in Japan and other Asian countries. Thank you.
Great, thank you for the question, and great question. I mean, and I think Japan. You mentioned that quite a lot actually during your question. I think there are two methods, right? I think there's the cost comparator method and the cost accounting method. I guess, I guess with some of the more kind of disease areas which have complete unmet need, I guess be the cost accounting method. I guess whereby you've got multiple treatment options available is going to be the cost comparator method. I think certainly, when it comes to the disease area that's got unmet need, potentially higher price potential, but also you have to be able to kind of manage that, within global pricing as well, because you've got referencing of other countries such as France, UK, US, for example, and there is a kind of a price adjustment. So there is, the potential to have perhaps a higher price in Japan compared to other countries, and I would say that the pricing is in between sort of US and EU. Right? I don't think it's actually above US level. In terms of pay for performance schemes, it's so important to provide optionality, to payers wherever they're from, actually. So, and it's almost like an expectation to negotiate the pay for performance or outcomes-based agreement even before settling on the price level, right? So, and that could be deferred payment arrangements over time. It could be outcomes-based, whereby you have a rebate to the healthcare system if the outcome is not fulfilled, for example. So, we're still early days, I guess, in Asia Pacific, regarding those outcomes-based, agreements. But certainly expect that to be here in Asia Pacific or more prominent, in the coming years. I mean, it has to be, right? In order to be able to address some of the kind of affordability issues.
Yeah, thank you. I think we had a question over here.
Yama about the dual track system, because they also apply in Taiwan. It's supposed to be a win-win situation for the patient have the right to access the new therapy, and for the company, they can have some income. But it also could be a win-lose situation, because if patient cannot get the expected result, then it will become win-lose situation. I just wonder, what's your experience about the price system? Like, how they define the price? If the patient cannot get the expected result, and then they can get the money back, or something like that. Thank you.
Pricing.
Yeah, pricing. Me? Okay, I'm not the pricing expert. And then the PMD is not jurisdiction for the pricing issue. So this is a totally personal opinion. As I mentioned, the Japanese system, that's all establishing many years ago. This is just for the chronic disease, like tablet, The now is totally different, but still using the existing system. So I think that doesn't fit for the cell and gene therapy product. So that's why in Japan also now thinking or starting the discussion for the what the good way to the pricing for cell and gene therapy product, not for the previous pharmaceutical products. So,
yeah, I mean, just for our Asian colleagues in the room, maybe you're listening to this, coming out to the FDA, US FDA, for example, to get an approval, it doesn't mean that they'll pay for you. So you have to have a separate strategy. So we have a clinical development strategy, obviously to get approval, but you actually build up your own market access strategy, almost at, close to the time of approval, hopefully, so that you actually you have a game plan to really deal with, here in the US, for example, deal with the private payers and do that early. And you have to really have a plan to, just like you have a clinical development plan, to how to address that. And in Japan, MHLW, has a very well set out guideline for pricing. So you need to not only get the approval, but have to really study the reimbursement strategy early, so that once you get the approval, there's a good payment to come through.
No, I appreciate that. And I think with that, we've got a little bit under a minute left, and I know we're just past 6 o'clock. So I want to thank my fellow panelists for joining me up here on stage. I want to thank you all again for sticking around, and thank again ARM for giving us the opportunity to get to talk about clearly an important subject for us. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.